Hello, everyone. It is 4 o'clock. So I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us today for this presentation from Hannah Schrager, owner of Goodyear Farms. Hannah's talk today is entitled An Introduction to Pacific Northwest Ecology. This event is co-hosted by Naturescaping of Southwest Washington and the Camas Public Library. My name is Elliot. I am from the Camas Public Library. I have a couple housekeeping items before I turn things over to Marlene from Naturescaping of Southwest Washington. I wanted to let people know that this will be recorded. Everyone who has registered for this event will receive a follow-up email from me that has a link to the recording that's posted, as well as a link to Hannah's slideshow. So you'll have access to that as well. So if you're worried about writing something down or on the slideshow, Hannah is sharing it with everyone who registered for this event. Also, it is possible to ask questions during the talk. If you would like to ask a question, you'll use the chat feature. So at the bottom of the Zoom window, you'll see an icon that says chat. You just have to click on that and type in your message. And then myself and Hannah will see it. I'll be popping in and out to help moderate any questions that come in. So you can ask questions during Hannah's talk. And then we'll also have a period at the end of the presentation where we can open up for questions as well. So that is it from me. I'm going to turn things over to Marlene from Naturescaping.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I will say a few words about Naturescaping for those of you who are non-members. Naturescaping is a not-for-profit organization, and we maintain, among other things, the Wildlife Botanical Gardens in Brush Prairie. Is a 3-acre facility consisting of 10 gardens. I hope all of you have come and seen it, and if not, please do and come often. Normally, these classes are part of our benefits package for members, monthly classes, which of course pre-pandemic were held live at Casey Center, and we hope sometime this year to get back to that. However, for now they're on Zoom, therefore they are open to the public. However, we will be happy to accept any donations you may want to make to Naturescaping and or become a member for the future classes. You can find all that information on our new website, naturescaping.org. And there is a membership form on there as well. However, we are still working on paying online. For now, you would have to download the form and send it in with payment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Hannah Schrager. She will actually tell you more about herself because she's better at it than I am. And I hope you enjoy this month's class. Stay tuned for future classes. Thank you.
Okay. So here is an introduction to Pacific Northwest ecology. Usually I practice this whole speech, but I've given it a couple times, so you guys are going to get like a really authentic experience of what I can remember today. So here's a little bit about me and like why you can trust me to tell you about this topic today. I spend a lot of my time outside in the natural processes like rain and sun that occur in the Pacific Northwest. I paid some pretty good money for formal credentials with for this in this field. So I have my master's in environmental science in forest ecology in the Pacific Northwest. I had a very illustrious career for like maybe a decade. I don't know if it's illustrious, but I worked for the state of Oregon, their Department of Forestry. I worked for Department of State Lands. I was an ecological researcher in Southern Oregon. And now I actually own a native plant nursery. I'm a native plant propagator for plants that evolved in our area. other animals trust me, as you can see by all these pictures of me with various animals. And then like a good ecologist, I wear many hats. I didn't realize in all these pictures I was wearing different hats until I put them on here. So, you know, part of, I'll define ecology in a bit, but part of ecology is kind of, you're kind of a jack of all trades. You're trying to understand processes on a big, large scale. So you have to be willing to learn about a little bit about a lot of different topics, and then you engage the specialists to help you further understand them. So that's my background, I guess, besides what I just talked about. Is I'm from Camas. I graduated from the old Camas High School. I went off to do what I was talking about in Oregon for a couple years. And then 2 years I moved back and I crossed territory lines, and I technically live in Washougal now, across the street from Camas. And here in Washougal, I have a native plant nursery, like I said. We're called Goodyear Farms. When my parents bought this property about 20 years ago, there was thousands of tires on it. And over the last 20 years, well, we had a joke because there were so many tires that it was the only crop we could produce. So over the last 20 years, we've cleaned that up, but we still tongue in cheek call ourselves Goodyear Farms. And I'll be open on weekends this month and in June, Saturdays and Sundays, 10 to 4. So if you want to come see it, it's a really good place to learn about native plants because I have them all in a really, I guess, controlled environment. You can look at them in pots and their different growth stages. And so native plants, we'll talk about a lot of them today, but they're plants that evolved in a region. So they're in theory better adapted for your yard, the conditions that occur in the Pacific Northwest, the climate, all the things that make the ecological conditions of our area. And then they benefit like habitat, right? If you can create a little butterfly, bee, and frog habitat in your backyard or apartment patio, why not, right? And still have cool plants. So that's what I do now. And then really my mission, like as an individual and what I do with the nursery, is to try to get people more connected to their place. So that's why I teach these classes, because we live in a really cool part of the world, and the more you know about it, the more it's fun to engage with. There's like I spies you can experience going down the road, or like sometimes I remember in college I learned about columnar basalt, which is like a rock formation that you see all over around here. And so it's like just changed my experience with the place that I grew up in and lived. So that's me. That's what I do. And now let's talk about the topic. So the definition, when you're talking about something, it's really good to like provide context so we're all on the same page. So the definition of the Pacific Northwest can change from time to time. The picture of the US is the definition of the US Lacrosse Association's Pacific Northwest League. So see, that includes Idaho and most of California and Montana. The center picture is kind of the area I will most focus on today. And that's the area between the Cascade Range of mountains, so like Mount Hood, and then the ocean. That is kind of the easiest thing to lump together for the purposes of this conversation. But I'll talk about beyond that. The Northwest is bigger than just that little green patch. And that's evidenced by the next picture, which is like ecoregions in the Pacific Northwest. So you can see how that little green patch in the center kind of aligns with the Coast Range shape on the picture on the right. And then this shape, or this picture on the right, it kind of shows places that are similar. So the east side of both of Washington and Oregon, they're very different than the west side. If you've ever been there, they have different seasonal changes, and that causes like the plants to be different. So if you've ever been to the east side, it's got real winters and it's got hot summers and it's got sagebrush, and their trees are different. And we don't, that's totally different than what we have here on the west side, which is like these large evergreen forests and much more temperate climate. So we're going to be mostly focusing on the Pacific Northwest as understood by that center picture, but definitely because of like my love for the area and the work I've done, we'll talk about some of the other parts of it too. And so ecology, sometimes I use this word wrong because it's like ecology is the study of, right? So it's observing or studying the relationships of things, and this is important, living and non, to each other and their physical surroundings. So biology is the study of living things, but ecology is the study of living things and how they interact with non-living things like weather or this picture of mushrooms. So these mushrooms are growing on a decaying piece of tree. This tree is in the process of decaying, and that dead matter, even though it's not alive, is still very much part of the ecological process that's occurring in that forest, even on that tree. So ecology is bigger than just the live parts of things, you know, rocks and fire and all of that is part of ecology. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So the ecology of a place, the ecological conditions of a place like the Pacific Northwest are influenced and determined by a couple things. And one of the biggest things is climate. So climate is bigger than weather, right? Like weather, so right now it's really sunny. That's the weather, at least here in Washougal. That's not necessarily the climate of the Pacific Northwest. And so the climate is like weather across a longer range of time. And so if you look at these pictures, the one on the left is a rain map. It's the average annual precipitation, the rainfall of different parts of our region. So you have Washington and Oregon there. And you can see the blue is more rain, the green, and then red, orange is less rain. So those rain patterns in that picture kind of match the ecological shapes on the picture on the right. And so climate, or the presence of rain or the lack thereof, the presence of wind or the lack thereof, the presence of snow and seasons, they determine what will evolve in an area, and they'll determine the ecological conditions of that area. So like on the west side of the Cascades where we are, an average place will get 30 inches of rain a year, up to, like, if you see that purple area on the Olympic Peninsula, or even the Tillamook State Forest, they're technically temperate rainforests. They can get up to 160, like 12 feet of rain a year. So that's going to be much different than the east side of the Cascades, which average a much lower annual like rainfall. But on the east side, they have more seasonal change, right? Like they'll get snow, they'll get temperatures above 100 more than we will. And so on the west side, we're temperate. Temperate means like pretty even keel with temperatures. It's not too hot or too cold. On the east side, they have more variation in their seasons. And that's like a climatic comparison. And that climate is driven a lot by the topography. So that mountain range I keep talking about. So the precipitation comes off the ocean, hits that mountain range, drops on our side, and then it's a drier experience east of the Cascades. And that's more of like a continental climate, like Colorado and further east. So I was trying to think, I wrote a couple notes for myself. So climate's a major influencer of what our ecological conditions are going to be in the Pacific North, well, anywhere, but rain and wind and the topography that controls that determines what our sort of I guess our vibe is here in the Pacific Northwest. Water, it's like no question that this is a major, well, I said rain a couple times, influencer of what things grow around here and what life is like around here. And one of the coolest things I keep like remembering is that we have all these evergreen trees here on the west side, right? And it rains a bunch, but it's also foggy a lot on the coast. So the water cycle on the coast actually involves evergreen trees having fog condensed on their needles. And then as that gets enough condensed fog on their needles, they create their own weather system under the canopy and drop like rain. So fog comes through, or even rain comes through, it's caught or condensed on our evergreen trees needles, and then it's a more slow release under that canopy of water. And this professor I used to take classes from said that like a third to a half of the rainfall in a Northwest evergreen forest comes from needle drip, or like that rain harvested from the fog, which is now we kind of have our own climatic conditions beneath the canopy, right? And then on the east side, where we don't have as many evergreen trees, or even here on the west side, there's a lot of other water cyclical things occurring, like rivers and lakes and streams. And so there's certain areas where the riparian area is where let's see, it's the water's edge. So it's like right along a riverbank, right? And some trees, especially on the east side, they can only grow where that water source is. So they'll grow within, and that determines the riparian area, within X feet of a water body, like a river, because they have a lot, maybe less rain. But we still have like pretty serious riparian area, like areas that we value very highly as riparian areas on the west side too, because there's a unique batch of species that may only occur there. There's processes that only occur there, like there's a process with salmon. Well, salmon we'll talk about in a little bit, but there's when salmon come back up river to spawn and then die and cycle their life and body through the system, animals will sometimes drag their carcasses up in that riparian area and sometime further into the forest. And now you're getting like marine nutrients from the bodies of these salmon in the riparian and forest area of our forests. And so the water system from the sky and on the land definitely plays a major role in the ecological processes of the Pacific Northwest. So another big thing that determines what can live and grow and what has died on a landscape, or what a geological process has occurred, is soil. And my soil teachers in the past would be disappointed with me, because whenever I have soil questions, I just Google it or call somebody more well suited to think about it than me. But it's like it's measured in certain components like sand, silt, and clay. And then a lot of things that determine the life that can grow out of soil is the organic layer. That's the top part of soil. And that's the one we're probably most familiar with as humans, because it's the one we like try to manipulate to have our gardens. So that center picture shows kind of like, you can see a soil profile there, right? You can see how it gets to be, it kind of changes colors, it changes texture. And soil scientists use this thing in the bottom right or bottom left to determine percent sand, silt, and clay. It starts to give us ideas about what the underground world is looking like. And so like one of the few things I remember is that our forest soils tend to be a little more acidic. And if you guys garden around here, there's probably a lot of clay in your soil, which is another good reason to use native plants. But whenever I have a soil question, there's a really cool thing online called the Web Soil Survey that's maintained by the federal government. And you can put your address, or like I downloaded this picture of Oregon and Washington, and it gives you much more specific information about your soil. And that'll give you an idea of another ecological influencer in our area. And then this is one of those sort of non-living things that dramatically affects the ecology of a place, and that's disturbance. So we have the climate, we have the soil, we have the things living and growing, we have the geologic history of an area, but then you talk about disturbance, like in our area, we have volcanoes and we have earthquakes. And so that gives a system or a a process, it shakes it up. So literally in an earthquake situation, but disturbance changes what's happening on a landscape. And it's absolutely essential to a lot of processes. So like a volcano, like Mount St. Helens, trees were growing, deer were grazing, and then the side of the mountain blew off, right? Well, now the forest was blown away. The rock and the ash and all that stuff that came out of that volcano was deposited across a huge area. Like, I mean, I wasn't alive then, but the whole West Coast, there was ash deposits that were driven by wind. And then now there was this massive clearing in areas where there used to be forests. So, as humans, we're like, oh my God, the devastation. But that gave things like lupin and fireweed and all these species that weren't necessarily growing underneath the forest canopy a restart. So here on the West Coast, we have earthquakes and volcanoes that are a form of disturbance that absolutely affect how our cycles work. Flooding is another, they have that a lot in the South, but we have that in the Willamette Valley. There's tidal flooding, like on the coast, you have multiple tides a day where you flood an area and then it goes away. That determines what can live there. We have seasonal flooding, like my field floods like 3/4 of the year, but then it's really dry in the summer. You've probably heard of like 100-year flood. That's a very human creation. Floods don't pay attention to years, but it's a good way to kind of average about how often you think a flood cycle would come through. And then one of the things that created the Columbia River Gorge was the Missoula floods, which was the release of a huge amount of water inland that carved out what we now know as the Columbia River Gorge. So that wouldn't exist without the disturbance of flooding. The picture on the right is the gorge. That's up Highway 14. The picture on the left is the Olympic Peninsula, and that those mountain goats are actually not native to the Olympic Peninsula. So they're like what we would call invasive species, and they're changing what happens there because they graze certain plants. They create little disturbances up there that are affecting the cycles that happen. So invasive species is one, I'll talk about that later, but one of the biggest ones that I think we're all interested in, especially after last year, is fire disturbance. And so I grew up not really thinking about fire disturbance in the Northwest because we didn't have the large scale wildfires that we've been getting for the first couple decades of my life. But fire is absolutely a natural process. And on the west side, it's usually an infrequent and very large scale process because with all that rain, it is unlikely to get the dry conditions, the sort of tinderbox conditions you need to start a fire. And so it usually, historically, before people were here manipulating the landscape, it would, there might be a fire every 200 to 500 years, but it would be huge. And it would be after a couple years of drought and then some lightning strikes, and then it would burn through our forests. And it would start that process over, like I was describing on Mount St. Helens, as sort of like a major disturbance, like a volcano. On the east side of the state, it's much different. There's more frequent flat fires because of how they're structured, or well, mostly because of their climate, but their forests have evolved with more frequent fires. So I'll just go to the next slide. So they have disturbance like fire on the east side, but it's just a different relationship. They have fire disturbance, but it's just a different relationship. So on the west side, I said there was like spaced out infrequent, but they were catastrophic fires. And one of the reasons we don't get large scale, or we didn't used to get large scale fires on the west side, is we used to have massive trees, and massive trees hold an incredible amount of water, so they don't catch fire very easily. And massive trees turn into massive down logs that also hold an incredible amount of water. So if you imagine a fire coming through on the west side, before there was sort of the forest we have now, it was hard to get it to really catch and really burn things because it was hard to get it to go into what's called the canopy, which is where all the trees are growing together. When you have a lot of diversity and you have big trees and you have little trees and you have wet trees, it's hard to get that fire up into the canopy, which is what happens now. It's what happened last year with those big fires. And similarly on the east side, you can see in that bottom picture, there's like systems that absolutely have to have fire to come through it before they can even grow more. And so on the east side, they have, where there were large trees, they'd have a lot more ground burns. Like you can see that fire just creeping along the needle layer on the bottom. And they have so much more fire over there. Some of their tree species have actually adapted to not, you may have heard about this, they're called serotinous cones, and they don't open up to release their seed until a fire comes through. Their seeds are covered in like wax. And so they need these constant fires on the east side to try, or to perpetuate the forest. And then as trees die, they burn. The serotinous cones, the cones open up, it opens the canopy, and then baby trees can come up. On the west side, it would be like a bigger event, right? And surprisingly, most fire, even today, is started by lightning, which is not an excuse to be reckless, because we know that humans can very much start catastrophic fires. But lightning, we can't control lightning, so we're going to always have to live with lightning. And now we have forests that have been, we've needed them, right? We've harvested their wood, we've replanted them, and on both sides, the east and west sides, see that top picture you can see is a very homogeneous forest. It's very similar. Everything was planted at the same time. It's all the same age. It's often all the same species. There's none of those large trees left. And these types of forests are the ones that create massive like burns now, because it's very easy for the fire to get into the canopy. There's a lot of what's called ladder fuels. So there's a lot of that stuff on the ground. It climbs up easily to that even age canopy. The trees aren't very big. They're, usually we planted them in densities that we were trying to harvest, so they're pretty dense. And so now we have a different relationship with fire in the Northwest, but it's still real, and it's still going to happen. And I just, having worked in forestry, where like a lot of people are interested in trying to find a balance, right? To work on it better. Elliot, was there a question? Somebody raised their hand.
Yeah, I saw someone raise their hand, and actually probably a good time just to remind people, because I think there more people came in, that if you'd like to ask a question, you can just type it into the chat box. There's a little chat icon on the bottom of the screen that'll open up a chat box, and feel free to type your question in there, and then we'll pass it along to Hannah.
Okay, no questions right now though.
Yeah, no questions.
Okay, so like I said, there's a couple things that very much shape the ecological conditions of the Pacific Northwest: climate, our rainfall, the cycling of water, the topography, the soil, the plants we'll get to, and then disturbance. And there's a lot of types of disturbance, but fire seems to be one that we're all very familiar with. And it has these disturbances, like fire, can change. They can change with the influence of humans. They definitely change with the influence of time. Volcanoes, like who knows when they're going to go off. So those are the main things that create the places we live in. So this is just a picture, a couple pictures from around our region. And if you just look at them and kind of take them in, you can see that we have a lot of different landscapes in the Pacific Northwest. So the first picture is down in Port Orford, Oregon. So that's the coast, right? There's things that grow there that don't grow anywhere else. This top center is the Columbia River Gorge. That's a picture of Beacon Rock. So that's going to be freshwater, not saltwater, but we have similar evergreen species. The upper right is the Sagebrush Sea of Eastern Oregon and Washington. That's probably Malheur County. I don't know. I like to go there a lot. The lower left is kind of classic Willamette Valley. It's like wetlands and large open fertile grounds. You can see mountains in the back, but there's a lot of open space that's really great for water. Actually, it's great for like wetlands, like water not moving quickly. And then the bottom right is just outside of Hood River. I think it's probably Catherine Creek. And that's just over just onto the east side. So you're still kind of in that evergreen area, but you're moving into that higher and drier landscape that they have on the east sides of our states. So when we talk about Pacific Northwest ecology, it's like a million different things. And there's kind of like a vibe that comes with each place, right? There's like a weather pattern vibe, and then there's like the life and the geology of what occurs in that area. We have like really cool geology though. I mean, volcanoes, right? Because look at that Port Orford picture, you got rocks right down into the ocean. And then Beacon Rock is an old like, is it a lava tube cap? So that was very volcanic. So yeah, that's all Pacific Northwest, and they're all related.
Oh,
So
we have one question, Hannah. The question is there a registrar of old growth trees in Clark County, especially at city, county, state parks?
I don't know of one. What you're likelier to find is just areas where there's remnant old growth. And uh, I don't know if there's not there. I feel like I would know about it if there was a unified place. Sometimes different agencies, like down in Coos Bay, the Department of Forestry had this one patch of old growth that they like. There was a hike to it. There's very, very limited old growth. So sometimes you just have to know somebody that knows where a cool big tree is, or go to the places where it for sure exists, like the Olympic Peninsula. Um, Oswald West is a little hike on the Oregon coast that's got some pretty big trees. Anywhere that's been protected for a long time, you're gonna maybe find larger tree species, but I don't know of a single unified place where they have. There might be one. My answer is I don't know, which is often my answer. You'll find. Hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, and I can't even like off the top of my head, I'm like, where are the cool big trees that I go see? But a lot is at the coast, and a lot is like up in that northern region of the Olympic Peninsula where there's like a protected forest. Okay, speaking of trees, so there's no such really thing as an old growth red alder, but I'm gonna just go through mostly the trees of our area, and I'm talking about now that green area west of the Cascades, because they were the first thing I learned to start learning about ecology. I'll just tell you, like, I didn't grow up camping or anything. I grew up here, but I didn't really start learning about sort of my natural surroundings till college, maybe even after college. So it was overwhelming. I was like, man, I'll never learn all this stuff. But I learned trees, and then I started to learn birds, and then I started to learn ferns. And then the more time you spend outside, kind of recognizing what you maybe learn about in some of these talks, the more it sticks. And so I've heard you have to hear something 7 times before it sticks. So this might be your first time, or it might be the time that actually sticks when we talk about trees. So one good tree to learn that's relatively easy to identify because it's one of the trees that loses its leaves around here. So it's deciduous. It grows along waterways very much frequently, and it has a couple characteristics that might help you remember it, and that's the red alder. And so if you look on the left, there's these leaves, and they have what red alder has what's called serrated leaves. So see how the edges of the leaves are jagged? That tells it apart. You know, that doesn't look like a big maple leaf that looks like a hand. It does look like another species called cascara, but cascara doesn't have those jagged edge leaves. So you start to learn the clues, right, that help you tell species apart. And one of the jagged leaves, or the leaves, is a clue for the red alder if it's growing near water. And then if you look at that top, see how it's got like white looking bark. That is actually something called lichen that's growing on it, but it's got that like white bark. It loses its leaves. It grows near water. And then another clue to look for is the things on the left. They're called strobili, and they look like tiny little cones. They're only like this big, but it's one of the only a deciduous tree, a tree that loses its leaves. It's one of the only trees like that has something that looks like a cone, like a cone. I don't know, botanists, and I'm not a botanist, so they have rules that I try to respect, but I would call this like a little tiny cone. It's technically called a strobili, and it comes only on this alder. And it's a really good feature of the tree, because within that strobili is its seeds, and that's a really good food source for birds year round, because it doesn't just decay when the leaves fall. It's inside that little strobili, and they can eat throughout the winter because these red alder have, and same with cones like of coniferous trees. And then red alder also has very red bark. I wouldn't recommend cutting trees down just to find out if they're red alder, but it's been used by Native Americans as a dye. There's a compound in the wood that's similar to aspirin, so it's a painkiller for like ethnobotanically. It grows really fast. Remember when I said like a volcano took out all the forest? This would probably be one of the first trees to come back after the flowers and the grasses came back and the shrubs. Then we're getting into tree world, and these are one of the fast growing trees that actually, it does what's called fixes nitrogen. It takes nitrogen out of the air through its leaves, and it processes it through these little nodules on its root that puts atmospheric nitrogen, something that plants need, nitrogen, into the soil. And so that's why it's something that often colonizes or grows in an area after a disturbance, because even if the soil's bad, if its soil is not nitrogen rich, the alder can source nitrogen from the air. So red alder is a cool one. It's got a lot of cool little fun facts about it. I would say like the timber industry for a long time loathed alder because it does grow quick. It can be dangerous to loggers, but now there's like a timber market for it. And it's a really good tree for that riparian area, that edge of the water I was telling you about, because it shades water, which is good for maintaining temperatures for fish in it. So yeah, red alder, that's a good deciduous tree to learn from our area. And then another good one that I think is kind of easy because its name is what it looks like, is the big leaf maple. And so there's my head with one of its leaves. That's a pretty big leaf, right? And then maple, we kind of, thanks to Canada, all can pretty much recognize the shape of that leaf. It's also deciduous. It loses its leaves. Oh, its Latin name is acer, and macrophyllum. So macro means large, phylum means leaf, big leaf, right? And so you are probably familiar with this one. Some people love it, some people hate it. I love it. It can get very large. And one of the coolest things about it is it grows a bunch of other stuff on it. So when I learned about this in one of my first plant classes, the professor called it the king of the epiphytes. And epiphytes are plants that grow on other plants. So if you look at that picture on the right, there's just like an insane amount of moss that grows in the crags of the bark of the big leaf maple. There's licorice ferns. You'll see ferns come. You'll see entire like massive ferns growing out of the crooks of these trees. And the hall of mosses up on the Olympic Peninsula is the hall of mosses because of a lot of big leaf maples. Moss will just drip down from it. And so if there is an insane amount of stuff growing on a tree you're looking at, maybe guess it's a big leaf maple if you don't see any of the leaves. A clue that I kind of just really realized is that even if it's winter or any time of year, if you don't seem to be able to figure out or like reach the leaves or the cones of a tree you're trying to figure out what it is, look on the ground, because all that stuff falls on the ground. So you might be under a tree that has no leaves on it, and you're out there in November and you're like, what is this? And if you see giant brown big leaves on the ground that look like big leaf maple, like now you're starting to figure out what tree you're standing next to, even though its leaves aren't there. And then the maples all have those little helicopters. There's an official name for those, and it's definitely not helicopters. I'm sure somebody knows. It starts with an S, I think. Anyways, it's how they reproduce. So they're transported by wind. They'll blow around, and that's how the maple gets its. I probably keep saying alder, huh? How the maple gets its seed further away from itself, and that's a clue that you're looking at a maple often, is the helicopters. I know it's not the official word for it. So the big leaf maple is another good one to know for around here. And they both of them, they turn a beautiful yellow and orange in the fall. They're the kind of the fall colors we get because we have a lot of evergreens, right? So I just told you about epiphytes, things that grow on other things. And I mentioned mosses, and then I earlier mentioned lichens. Mosses are one of those things that they can harvest like atmospheric water. They need a lot of water, right? So we have a pretty humid area with our frequent rainfall on the west, and it kind of stores in the humidity of a forest, kind of retains that moisture in the air. And so we can get a lot of mosses because they need to be wet all the time. Mosses don't necessarily hurt the trees that they're growing on. Sometimes humans don't like them because we think it decomposes our roofs, and it doesn't not, because right, it's holding water against our infrastructure. But if you have moss on your tree or lichen on your tree, it's not damaging the tree. Lichen is something I didn't really distinguish from moss before I knew, but moss is like a plant. Lichen is this partnership between algae. We all know algae from like the river, like the pond, right? It's algae and fungus, and they're growing together. So in that bottom picture, the green you see is an algal type of plant, and the brown you see is a fungus. And they partner to source nutrients from two different places. The algae gets energy from the sun because it's got chlorophyll, it can photosynthesize, and the fungus sources nutrients from whatever medium it's growing on, rocks, soil, the tree bark, and they work together to help each other. And so lichen is actually a partnership of two things happening. And there's a ton of different types of lichen. There's a little anecdote. Agatha algae and Freddy fungi got together and they were liking it. So if you want to remember that, that's a fun thing to throw out there. So yeah, those are just like maybe underappreciated aspects of our landscape around here. And once you start like looking up lichens, you're gonna get I don't like remember them because there's so many of them, but they have like the nuttiest names. Like if you want to get a field guide, this Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast by Pojar is probably the most commonly used one around here. It's probably the most comprehensive, even though it's outdated a little bit. Actually, I encourage anyone that's into writing field guides to write a new one for the Pacific Northwest, or expound upon this Pojar one, because there's more than what we have here. But if you look up lichens in this Pojar book, there are such awesome names like false pixie cup or dragon cladonia or antlered. This is literally a lichen called antlered perfume. Devil's matchstick. Lichens have like the coolest names. So yeah, they're a thing and they're cool to learn about. And if there's like, you could do a 2-hour talk just on lichens. I just don't know enough.
Oh, Hannah, actually, there's a couple comments and one question.
Okay.
One was from an attendee that said Opal Creek in Oregon has old growth trees.
Yes, I've never been there, but one of my professors like taught there. So Opal Creek is definitely a place to visit if you want to see big trees.
Someone else had a comment about, said, don't forget the third partner of lichen, yeast. And then I'm not sure if you wanted to answer this later, but someone was asking a question about what type of plants would work well with their property, which they describe as waterlogged a quarter of the year and bone dry the other 3/4.
Oh, well, okay. So the lichen one, yeast might be the third partner. I understood it to be cyanobacteria, which is like a third aspect of lichen. I don't know if it's all lichens, but cyanobacteria it's like what can grow in like the Mariana Trench. It doesn't need oxygen, but the ones that grow on lichen, they're as diverse as the funguses and as the algae that make up the lichens. So yeah, maybe they're the same thing as yeast. There's so much to know about this. Sometimes I'm like, oh, cyanobacteria, that's a big word. But yes, thanks for reminding us of the non-traditional relationship of lichen with the third partner. And then if you want landscape advice, go to goodyearfarms.com and send me an email, because I will definitely tell you what natives will grow there. So, or come to the farm this weekend or next weekend, because that's like my job, is to give you guidance on native plants in your yard. So yeah, definitely send me an email with that question. Okay, lichen. Okay, so now we're just getting into weird stuff that I know about the Pacific Northwest. So we're on the forest floor with these species, and there's some of the most unique species we have around here that, like, maybe they occur in other parts of the world, but one of them is ghost pipe or Indian pipe. It's got a lot of different words or a lot of different common names. You can find it in this Pojar book, but Monotropia uniflora, and it is what's called a saprophyte. So a saprophyte is effectively something that eats decay. And these plants they're white. If you see that picture on the left, they don't have chlorophyll. They're not eating energy from the sun. They don't photosynthesize. What they're doing is they're using a process to absorb nutrients from decaying matter on the forest floor. So see how this Indian pipe or ghost pipe is coming up through what's called duff, like dead needles, dead leaves. super cool. It's like a Death Eater, right? And it's a majorly important part of recycling on the forest floor. If we didn't have anything eating our decay or the decay of the plants, we didn't have any that part of the cycle, we would just be up to our eyeballs in dead stuff, right? Like pretty quickly. So this is a plant, it's not a fungus, it's a plant. Although some funguses can be saprophytes that eats dead things. And because of that, it looks super weird. It's like a fleshy, non-green plant. And that picture was actually taken at Beacon Rock, so I know we have them close by. And then the picture on the right is it's when after it's dead, and I had never seen it in that state. So that's after the summer, it decays and it's like turns this black, super cool, I don't know, like otherworldly look. So that's a Monotropia uniflora. And if you're lucky enough to see it out there in the woods, like definitely appreciate it. Don't pick it. You can't grow it at home. Like I mean, if you can, you're into some weird science, but it's really, a lot of the things that are super unique are highly connected to their environment around them through frequently what's called like mycelia. It's like a fungal network. And so you have to have that because this little species is connected to a bunch of other species around it. And that's why we can't like farm it, because we have to build like a healthy system for it to grow. So yeah, ghost pipe, that's a super cool species we have right here in the Columbia River Gorge. That is what's called a saprophyte. And then in Southern Oregon, I took these when I worked down there. We might have them around here, but these are two other saprophytes. Same thing, they eat decaying matter. The gnome plant, I've seen it grow a lot in Doug fir forests and spruce forests, and it's like this pink, fleshy little Death Eater. It's super cool. It looks, it kind of looks like a flower, but there's no green on it. And then the ground cone, this I took down near Ashland. It looks like a pine. It looks like a pine cone coming, like that fell off a tree and is stuck in the ground. But that's just sort of part of its disguise. And it is a saprophyte. It is a living, growing thing, connected and networked under the ground right there. So those are a couple other saprophytes that we have growing in the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, I guess, yeah, the Pacific Northwest. And we also have carnivorous plants, which I guess I didn't know about till I was older. So I've only seen sundew in Southern Oregon. You can tell by looking at it that it's sticky, so it traps its prey by having it stick to it. And then usually carnivorous plants, the way they work is they have some sort of digestive enzyme that breaks down their prey, so they can absorb the nutrients of it. And so sundew processes the bugs it eats through its sticky little fingers it has. And you can see that they don't 100% only eat prey. They also photosynthesize. They're green, they're photosynthesizing. But sundew grows in like kind of wet, in fact, a lot of our carnivorous plants grow in like wet sun. And they're super unique. Like they need really specific conditions, soil conditions. One on the right, the cobra lily, it needs like serpentine soils. And this one you can absolutely go see if you're ever in Florence, Oregon. Just north of Florence on Highway 101, you'll see a highway sign and it says Darlingtonia Wayside. And Darlingtonia is the name of the cobra lily, the genus. And I had never stopped there growing up, but it's got a vault toilet if you need to use the toilet. But it is just like a parking lot, a vault toilet, and then like a very short path. And you walk down it, it's right off Highway 101. And you can see a field of these cobra lilies. And the sundew is like maybe like that tall. A cobra lily is like 2 feet tall. It is like a large carnivorous plant. And the way these trap and eat their prey is they have an opening under that like cobra hook. They're under that cobra hook of their shape. There's an opening. And so bugs will crawl or fly into there. Then they have, from the inside and from the outside, they have like a stained glass look that confuses their prey. So their prey is now like trapped within their hood. And it's like, I can't get out. I don't know which way's out. It's trying to fly through the little spots that it thinks are openings until it gets tired. And then down in the base of that like cobra neck, there's digestive enzymes that break down the prey. So those are both in Oregon for sure. So we have saprophytes, we got carnivorous plants out there. We got big trees, we got little trees. And here is the 3 main trees of the Pacific Northwest coast. So, and I would suggest just starting with learning these 3 evergreens, because there's lots out there, but these are the ones that classify the west side forests. And Doug fir actually grow on the east side too. But Doug fir is our #1 timber tree. It is a very important tree. I think it's the state tree of Oregon. So when I was talking about processes starting over with disturbance, you'll get grasses that grow, and then flowers, and then shrubs, and like smaller plants, and then you'll get those deciduous trees. And then the first evergreen tree you usually get here on the west side, in like the succession of a forest, is the Doug fir, because it can handle sun. It grows quicker than our other evergreen trees. That's why it's a good timber tree. It only lives about 500 years. I mean, it can live like 800, but it matures quicker than our other evergreens, and it grows faster than our other evergreens usually. So Doug fir, the way you can tell it apart from other trees is it's got really craggy bark. So if you look at that picture on the left, that's actually 3 Doug firs together. And so you can see it gets more craggy as it gets more mature. Its needles, they go all the way around the branch. So they're not like flat. They whirl around it, and they're soft. They're not going to stab you. There's a tree that grows on the coast called the Sitka spruce. Man, that's like legit needles, but you can like run your hand on a Douglas fir. And then one of the easiest ways to learn the Douglas fir or tell it apart, like I said, you can find it either growing on the tree or on the ground below it, is its cone. So its cone is about 3 inches, and it's got these little appendages sticking out of it. You see that picture of the cone, and it's the only cone around here that looks like this. And there's just a little anecdote that I learned that helps me remember this cone from many others. And it's this story about a great fire, and as the mice of the forest were trying to escape the fire, they dove under the scales of the Doug fir cone, but their butts didn't fit. So now all the Doug fir cones have what looks like a little mouse butt hanging out between its scales. So if you look at that picture, it looks kind of like 2 little tiny legs and a tail, the bottom half of a mouse trying to dive under the scales. And that's the only cone that looks like that around here, is the Doug fir cone with the mouse butts. And like I said, it's about 3 inches. I think it's one of the bigger cones. We don't have those big pine cones they have on the east side, because we don't have as many pines out west. On the coast we do. But Doug fir is like our heavy hitter tree. Honestly, if someone's like, what's this tree? You could probably be like, it's a Doug fir. And you'd have like a 50% shot if it was an evergreen tree. So that's a good one to learn. And with the cone, it's a pretty easy one to remember. The major like tree of life that we have that defines our area is the Western red cedar. And this tree you can tell because its bark strips off. It's not craggy like that Douglas fir. It's got like strips of bark, and it's got, if you look at this, here's a video I took of its needles. I think it's got audio too. But they're very flat. They're like not like they're not like pine needles. They're like a flat, soft needle. Its branches kind of J-hook. And the reason I said it's called the tree of life is Native Americans that came up around this area, they used it for everything. You can use that bark to weave clothes. You can peel it off and like weave clothes, weave rugs, weave roofing out of it. You can use the timber to build things that a lot of Native people around here used it for their boats called dugouts, their canoes. So and I've been party to a tribe carrying an actual dugout, and it is incredibly heavy. It takes a whole team to carry a traditional dugout Western red cedar canoe. But yeah, those flat needles and the strippy bark, that's the best way to tell the Western red cedar apart from, especially the Doug fir with the whorled needles. And I don't know, that tree is just like a very important tree ethnobotanically, and it tends to grow, it can handle a lot more shade than the Doug fir. So the Doug fir will come up, and then underneath it, you'll have the Western red cedar, and they can live like 1,200 years. They can get to be quite old if they're allowed to, and be like obviously like a very important part of the forest, very important part of humans in the forest. We all know it. Well, I don't know if we all know, but it's a very durable wood. So that in the background of this is cedar shingles. Like it's very durable to weather. It's a desirable wood for humans to build with because it just doesn't decay as fast as some of the other ones. So the Western red cedar, like I said, the bark, the strips of bark, and the flat needles is the way to tell that one apart. And then this is what is, oh yeah, it just makes me watch this over and over again. There we go. And this is what we would call like the climax species of the Pacific Northwest. When you learn about forests, you tend to learn about like their climax tree. And so like the tree that would live the longest in that area, that determines, it's like a fast way to reference that type of forest. And we, on this part of the world, we have Western hemlock, Western red cedar forest. And these are trees that'll live over 1,000 years. Its bark is kind of halfway between the Douglas fir and the Western red cedar. It's not as craggy, but it's not strippy like the cedar. You see that picture on the right. And then the way to tell it apart is its needles. So its genus and species is Tsuga heterophylla. Hetero means different, phylo means leaf. And so if you look at this video, it's got all of its needles, all of its leaves. They're different sizes. Some are little, some are big. See how they're like different lengths? And then underneath its needles, it has these two little white lines. That's kind of a little key to tell it apart from other ones. Different needle lengths, and then the white lines, that's the stomata. That's like how it breathes, it gas exchanges. And it's got a really, for being one of the oldest, largest trees in our area, it's got the tiniest cone, like, I don't know, like the tip of my thumb is like how, if you see a bunch of tiny cones, I used to collect them as a kid. Those are Western hemlock cones. Actually, cedar cones are really tiny too, big trees with little cones. And another way to tell the hemlock apart, and a lot of hemlocks do this, there's the mountain hemlock on the east side, is the very top of it droops over. So like if you look at the very tippy top of the trees, if some of them are bent like this, they're probably a hemlock. So it's got that little telltale thing about it. Okay, those are our 3 main trees. Well, kind of our 5 main trees. That's the 3 main evergreens in our forest. There's other ones, and certainly as you get away from like the Columbia River Gorge, the west side of the Columbia River Gorge, you start to, like on the east side of the state, they have ponderosa pines, they have lodgepole pines. At the total far west of our state, we have Sitka spruce, and we also have, it's called shore pine over there. But these trees are the ones that are right here in like the Camas area. This is what our forests are made of. Oh gosh, this thing. Okay. So now as we move down from the tree layer, we're amongst the ferns. We have loads of ferns around here. The biggest one we have is the one on the right, the sword fern. That's the one that just grows to like, I don't know, the size of this chair I'm sitting in. It's our largest fern. It can handle a bit more sun than some of our other ferns. Allegedly looks like a sword. It's fern frond. I think it looks like a Yankee Doodle feather. But it's like a big deal, you know, it grows all over the forest floor around here, sword fern. It's strongly rooted, so if you're ever climbing a big hillside in the woods, you can kind of grab the base of these ferns and you can trust them to hold you in there. And then it's all ferns existing below the canopy of a forest are a sign of structure in that forest. They're a sign of diversity. In a lot of our plantation forests that we use for timber, you don't get a lot of stuff growing on the ground because you often don't get a lot of light to the ground because it's a lot of even-aged trees, right? So ferns are a good sign that you have some diversity in your forest. Licorice fern, I mentioned, it predominantly grows, it looks a lot like sword fern. It's got that standard fern shape, but it loves it wet. It predominantly grows up on big leaf maples, or like it can grow on like cliff sides, but like it grows with that moss. It really likes consistent moisture, not necessarily standing water, but like moisture that it has available to it. And it's allegedly the root of it tastes like licorice. I mean, it doesn't taste bad, but I wouldn't describe it as licorice, but it's called licorice fern, so we'll describe it as such. Yeah, like I said, it's got a pointier tip like it comes to a pointy tip, and it's not as big. It's certainly not as big as a sword fern. It kind of grows in little individual fronds, in patches though. It actually makes a really great hanging basket. It's dormant right now, but if you put licorice fern through like if you have like a chicken wire basket or like like a grate, licorice fern will grow through the grates, and it's just like it's got this really cool vibe of growth. And then my two favorite ferns are actually the ones on the left that I should have started with, and I like them because they have black stems. They're super cool. Deer fern, it's a really great landscape option, especially if you have shade. It's like a waxy color or a waxy green. It's got so ferns reproduce in a super weird way that I couldn't even describe to you if we had time because I don't fully understand it. But it's got alternation of generations. They basically have one part of the plant that puts out the babies, the spores, and then they have the other part of the plant that is like, it's non-reproductive. I don't know. So I'm sure somebody knows about alternation of generations, but in the deer fern, you can see the two distinct, it's got what looks like pretty typical fern fronds, and then it's got these elongated black, more spaced out fronds. And that's the two parts of its reproductive cycle, called alternation of generations, if you want to Google that. But Wikipedia does a pretty good job describing it, but that's some botany stuff that I can't really remember right now. It doesn't get as big as the sword fern. It only gets to be about a foot tall. But like I said, it's a really cool option for your yard. It's kind of got like a Japanese garden look. And then same with the maidenhair. Maidenhair is deciduous. It's not evergreen year round. The deer fern is, more or less. Everything has a period of dormancy, but maidenhair fern looks like a big open hand. It grows by waterfalls. If you've ever been to Fern Canyon in the redwoods, that's maidenhair fern. And it is just like, so it's like lacy. It's super cool. My husband says it exists in the mist of waterfalls, but it's got the black stem, like a world palm look around like a semicircle, and just a super cool one. I have some growing in like a pot in my front, like shaded area. It likes sun too, though. I thought it didn't, but it definitely can handle sun as long as it has water. So those are our ferns. Those are our major ferns. And then this I just put in here so you know that there is like a bunch of science and investigating going on to help us better understand these ecological processes. So this is what I used to do down in Coos Bay. We were looking at like a pathogen that kills the Port Orford cedar, and it's this, actually, if you have arborvitae in your yard and they're just dying and you don't know why, there is a good chance you have this Phytophthora lateralis in your soil. And it's a soil-borne disease that just kills this select suite of species of trees. One of them is arborvitae because they're a type of cedar, and it's pretty impactful to the timber industry because it's transported by water. So, you know, how are you going to stop that? So one of the things that we were doing down there is like trying to see if there's any natural resistance. So we planted a bunch of Port Orford cedar in a known Phytophthora site, and then just watched them grow over several. It's still happening. It's still going on down there, to see who lives, because maybe there's some genetic resistance out there. And then like the Forest Service is who I was working with to explore it. Like, why don't, you know, if this particular suite of trees is resistant to it naturally, those are the ones they're going to want to breed for timber and for planting because they won't succumb to the Phytophthora. So, you know, that's like a little study that's not even little, it's a large study that's existing to try to understand, one, how soil and trees work together, how diseases are transported in soil and water, and then, you know, for our human uses, what we can do about it. Another sort of forest science project I was involved in was for this Western lily. It's a super rare endangered flower down there in Southern Oregon. And when you don't have disturbance, like if you don't have openings in the forest because you've planted it very densely, you change the landscape so that certain things can't live. And like this lily, it was getting encroached upon by the woods. There was getting to be too dark where this known population was. So we went in And we didn't want to mess up the flower, so we thinned a bunch of the trees. And then you can see the bottom left corner, I worked with crews to we carried out the logs, we chipped them up, and then now they're measuring to see, I was like tripping to make sure I wasn't killing the flower while we were doing this. But it's definitely, the population was not eliminated. And I have to follow up with my colleagues down there what their data was the last couple of years, because I think we did this in 2018. Yeah, so there's science going on out there. That's what's informing all these words I'm saying to you today. And then actually, Marlene, you should try to get someone to do a fungi class, because everyone loves to hear about mushrooms. I definitely don't listen to me about mushrooms. I only know like chanterelle and then amanita on the bottom. I know the coral mushroom in the upper right, but like I wouldn't eat mushrooms that I picked because I don't know enough about them. And I've taken classes. I had some good advice in one of the classes. He's like, just learn one mushroom a year. And if you can get familiar enough with the one mushroom that year, over the years, you'll learn them. Because, you don't want to go around eating stuff. Well, maybe you do, but it can be a problem for you. But we have tons of mushrooms. Like I said, we have a lot of moisture on the west side. Actually, where they have fires is where morels grow best. And so there's a little exchange there. And we have chanterelles. One of the ways to tell them apart from others is their gills. They have gills. See this picture, you can see gills is the best way to describe it. And the gills go all the way down to the base of that mushroom. The amanita looks like your standard Mario grow bigger mushroom. It's got the red with the white dots. It's toxic. I don't think it'll kill you right away, but definitely not like one we eat for dinner. The coral mushroom, I'm pretty sure is edible. It looks kind of like coral, right? Like under the sea coral. And then the turkey tail, that one's pretty common. I see that growing out of like decaying trees a lot. I'm pretty sure that that's edible, but like I said, I am not the authority on that. And then spalting is something cool, like woodworkers know about it. It's like where the fungus dyes the wood. You can see that top middle, it's like, it looks blue. That's a form of spalting. It's like a chemical reaction between the fungus and the wood that it grows on. So there's, like I said, there's cool stuff. And that's all. The mushrooms are alive, but the reason they exist is because of the decaying matter that they can eat as they grow. And then what we see as mushrooms is actually like the fruiting body. Most of what's going on with fungus is happening underneath the soil. So I often recommend a product for people that are planting native plants and planting any plants called mycorrhizae. And there's tons of types of it, but it is effectively a massive network of fungal connections. And when you add a mycorrhizae product to your plantings, there's a chance you're maybe putting the right species in that helps. What happens is these fungal mats, they'll like connect to the roots of a plant, and then they'll connect to the roots of another plant, and then they'll connect to the roots of another plant. So when we say like trees are talking to each other, the way they're talking is through mycelium. The way they are connected, and it's this massive underground network that is connecting things in our forests. And I think that we currently believe the largest existing living organism on the planet is a mycorrhizal mat under the floor of in the soil. So what we're seeing is we're seeing like the reproductive part of a mushroom. What's occurring most of the year is happening with mushrooms underground. So yeah, look up mycorrhizae. It's got a lot of consonants in it, like mycorrhiza or something. It's really cool to learn about. And it's actually a product we use for like landscaping and improving our soil. Okay, that's plants. Should we take a break? Does anyone need a break? Like a bathroom break? Question break, Elliot?
No new questions.
Okay.
But if you need a break, we can take a quick one.
I guess people can walk away whenever they want. I'll just keep going because now we're going to switch to animals. And so I did not used to care about birds. Probably until my 20s. I took a class at Clark College. It was like an 8-credit class, and I was like, yes, this is so many biology credits for going on a trip to see birds. I'll learn about birds. and I've like never looked back. We went to the East Side Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. You can see so many migratory birds that you can't help but learn them because you get to see them all compared to each other. And that's where I learned how to bird. And it's also like this is just kind of like a good set of rules for learning about anything, especially in the natural environment. But one of the things, if you're looking for wildlife, is to hold still. So if you're moving, wildlife is like, nah, I'll just stay away from that movement. So hold still. And a lot of people just go to their binoculars and try to find a bird that way. But it's more effective if you kind of scan the horizon or the patch of trees or the wetland with your naked eye, and you just look for movement, because wildlife is going to likely move, you know, if you're still enough to convince it to move. And once you catch movement or like a weird shape, that's when you should get your binoculars out to try to get a little more zoomed in view of what you're maybe trying to identify. And then just in general, in life, in anything you're trying to learn, like everything is a clue, right? Like which shape, what shape is that nut or bolt? Or how did that animal move when I was looking at, like, was it quick? Was it slow? All of these things, you don't realize you're doing it, but this is how we learn, right? Like, so start to pay attention to the different clues that you're getting from the setting you're in. Where was this animal or this bird located? Was it down on the water's edge? Was it up in a tree? Was it at the very top of the tree? Was it in a cliff? All that stuff is going to start giving you a clue onto like, what am I looking at? Is it near a dumpster? What time of the day is it? Like, is it morning? Is it high noon? Is it night? You know, is it night and there's a bird that's either weird or probably an owl? And then start paying attention, like kind of take in that sort of like environmental stuff, and then start to worry about like, what color is it? What shape is it? You know, is it large? I am not good enough to do bird sounds, but if you can it's a clue, right? The sound of the call is definitely a clue. I will pay attention to it, but usually I'm like, oh, I don't know, they're bird sounds, right? So when you're trying to figure out what you're looking at, even if it's like a tree, right? How big is it? Is it growing in the shade? Is it growing in the sun? Where are you? You know, are you in Arizona or are you in the Olympic Peninsula? And then we can start to narrow down what specifically you're looking at. So when I'm out in the field, I don't really like having my phone, but there's a lot of plant apps, there's bird apps. I like to use these like paper ones. They don't have everything, so sometimes these paper field guides, you can only get down to like maybe like close to what you're looking for. And then it's good to go with people that know better than you, but you're going to learn better if you figure it out yourself. So like, I don't know, those plant apps, they're going to tell you something, but I would say they're only right, like, as someone that's a little more educated on it, they're right like 60% of the time. So there's still 40% of the time they're going to give you an answer that, 30 or 40% of the time that isn't totally accurate. So they're good for getting a clue, the apps, but you got to kind of do the work yourself if you really want to learn some stuff. And then just like be jazzed anytime you think you figured something out, talk to your friends about it, I don't know, Clark has really good classes with really educated people that teach them. Like, celebrate what you do know, because there's we mostly don't know things, right? And what can we really know? But celebrating like the little victories, like I do know what a chanterelle is. I am proud of that. And I don't know about mushrooms, but I do know that one. So I'm like, that's a celebratable thing. So that's just sort of like a rundown on like how to ID things when you're out in the woods or in the desert. And then I'm not a bird photographer. There's a lot of good bird photographers out there. I just don't have any cool pictures because I'm not that fast with that good of a camera. But I do have a picture of this northern flicker's feather that I found in my field. And northern flicker, you probably see them everywhere, and you're like, this looks like a robin. But they're like a very common woodpecker, and they kind of fly in an undulating pattern, and they have way cool feathers. Once you start to like kind of pay attention to the nuances of the birds, you start to see the different, like a robin, you're probably going to find mostly on the ground. A northern flicker might be stuck to the side of a tree like a woodpecker. If you see it like what looks like a robin stuck to the side of a tree moving up and down like a woodpecker, it's probably a northern flicker. You know, if all you know is a bald eagle and a robin, like you still know birds. That's still birds that you know. So maybe you just like look up a couple fun facts about the birds you already know. For example, I learned that eagles like bald, and I actually saw them doing this once at Cape Disappointment. They do this like mating ritual where they fly really high and then I don't know, they need to like mate in the air. So they lock wings or lock like talons, and they will like free fall in this crazy aerial display. I'm not sure if that's when they mate or if they mate elsewhere later, if that's just a courtship dance, but they're just like free falling, and then before they hit the ground they'll separate. Eagles, like giant eagles, you know, they're easy to tell because they have, well, usually they have the white head, but what's that called, juveniles, they don't, they're very brown. Robins, you know, they have blue eggs. That's kind of cool. They're kind of my metric for like bird size. Like how big is this thing in relation to a robin, right? Is it also the size of a robin, like a flicker? Is it smaller, like a different songbird, or is it bigger, like an owl or a falcon? You know, you can use what you know to sort of build on and learn about more. Some of my favorite birds are the osprey, which they're around right now. I saw an osprey fighting an eagle on the Washougal River the other day. Little birds usually will always attack big birds. So you'll see like an eagle fly through with a bunch of crows behind it. But osprey they hunt and live near water usually. They're black and white. They're the ones that go up and I was watching all these fishermen fish this pond in Yakima once, and no one was having any luck. And then this osprey just came and it just dive bombed and it picked up a fish and flew away, like just shaming all the other fishermen out there. Another favorite bird is only on the east side. Mostly, I think they're on the southern Oregon coast, but they're the golden eagle, and they're like bigger than a bald eagle. They usually eat like jackrabbits, so they live in the sagebrush area. I don't know. My friend that owns a ranch said he saw them down on the southern Oregon coast. They're massive. They don't have the white heads and white tails like a bald, but they're bigger. They're brown. Sandhill cranes are super cool. If you ever hear about when the wildlife refuge starts to have their festivals again, they're super cool. They're like large wading birds with a little red thing on their head. They're very big. They're like ostrich-like almost, not quite that big. I like woodpeckers. I of course like owls. I have a barn owl that lives in my barn. It poops on everything and it throws up its pellets, but it's cool, so I'm gonna let it live there. And then I like the spotted towhee because looks like a robin, but whenever I see it and I'm like, ooh, not a robin, it's a towhee, and it's got like a red eye and a speckled wing and a red breast. It's just a cool one I like. And currently, if you're interested or have some free time, the spring migration is happening right now in the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And I usually try to go every year, but if you get a chance to go out there, there's a field station out. Well, you probably know about it because those people occupied it. But the field station is now no longer being occupied, and you can stay out there and you can go to the different wetlands, and you can see like subtropical birds. You can see ibis. You can see tons of like, they're called avocets, and you can see terns. I don't know. It's just a good place to go to learn birds, because you're like, oh, there's just like a ton of birds around me right now, and they're not as hard to like catch in the woods. So yeah, for the next couple weeks, the massive migratory, it's like a flyway for West Coast birds to get from the north to the south or vice versa. And this is the best time to see them. I usually go like Memorial Day weekend time. Burns, Oregon, that's where it's near.
Oh, Hannah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, one was a comment about other places that have classes. Someone said Tree Song Nature Center has great classes on birds, mushrooms, and wildlife. And could you restate the bird in the picture, the feather?
Oh, the northern flicker?
Northern flicker. Thank you.
Flicker, yeah. Northern flicker. Yeah, tree. Actually, I taught this class for Tree Song like a while ago. But yeah, they have really good bird classes online. And then they're starting to have more in-person classes too. They have a tracking class. We just installed a native plant circle garden there at Tree Song. So if you get the chance to go there, you could look at their garden and see a bunch of native plants that we help them put in and get. That's a really good local one is Tree Song. You know, Xerxes Society out of Portland, Audubon. A lot of the county programs will do sort of these natural realm classes. Yeah, Camas Library. Someone raise their hand. Maybe not. Elliot's gone. Okay.
No, sorry,
Okay.
I don't see anyone. I was just looking. I do not see anyone that has raised their hand.
Okay. And then back, this is sort of like, I think I'm wrapping up animals. Iconic animals of our area. We got the fish. Salmon are very much an important part of our identity on the West Coast. To the native people, it's really like a testament to connectivity, because salmon are born in freshwater. They live part of their lives in the freshwater. They go out to the ocean. They live a huge part of their life in the ocean, and then they come back to the place they're born to spawn. So talk about something that's like really spans the breadth of like landscapes, and especially here in the Pacific Northwest. I said that sometimes like their carcasses are used as fertilizer in the forest because of the food webs that exist that depend on their body. Yeah, there's several types of salmon. They're carnivores. They're hard to grow in captivity. I mean, we do it, but you can see by their teeth that they're definitely meat eaters. Another really iconic species is the Pacific salamander. It's a giant salamander, or the Pacific giant salamander. We have a couple. We have like the rough-skinned newt. If you have any sort of salamanders or frogs in your landscape, that's a really good sign of habitat health, like Pacific tree frog, because they have porous skin. They're sort of like canaries in the mines. They'll tell you, well, they'll die if your water's polluted, or if there's not enough oxygen in your water. They're a good metric for some habitat health, because they're an aspect of diversity that only exists if your landscape is healthy. So yeah, we have a cool amphibians around here. And then you go to the coast, and that's definitely part of our Pacific Northwest. Like I said, there's like daily tidal flooding, and that creates our tide pools. We have anemones and these mussels that depend on part of the day they're underwater and part of the day they're not. Gooseneck barnacles, those washed up. I think I found like a float, like a glass float. I was lucky enough to find one, and they had gooseneck barnacles. They're like giant barnacles. And then actually large woody debris is sort of like a non-living version of the salmon. It really connects the forest to the water system and to the coast, because you have trees that may fall in the forest, and then they may fall or get carried down or slide down to the water system, and then they create habitat in the water by slowing it down, and fish can find refuge from rapids behind a tree that's fallen into the water, and then maybe at some point that same tree, or maybe it grew on the coast, it's carried out to the ocean. And not only do you have nutrient cycling, but you have habitat building. So then it washes up, these large down trees wash up onto the beach, and that creates some structure, and you definitely don't want to be standing on those with water. If the water is coming in, you just want to get out of the way, because those things can roll, you can have a massive tree and 1 centimeter of water can lift it and roll it onto you. So just be aware at the beach. But downwood is like a really cool connectivity aspect of all of our landscapes. This is a cool place in Southern Oregon. This picture on the left and the picture on the right are the exact same. They're not the exact same location, but they are. They're like within feet of each other. And this is just one stormy day apart. One day on the coast, it can be this flat ocean, right, on the left. And then at Shore Acres, I had no idea this place existed growing up here, but they have, if you get a 25-foot swell on the ocean, the way that the ocean down there interplays with the rock cliffs, you get these 300-foot waves that come in, and it is just like really incredible to watch. So like I said, like one day can just the swell and the change in weather can change that ocean, and those landscapes have evolved with that change, and so they have to be able to withstand 300-foot waves, and then also no waves at all. So the coast is a very dynamic, constantly changing place. Let's see. And then I was just, the estuary is that where the fresh and the salt water meet. And that's like where those inland freshwater systems and the coastal ocean systems combined. This is the South Saloon Coos Bay. It's slow moving. It's where a lot of the salmon spend their youth. You know, they're in the estuaries in our part of the world. They're developing, growing salmon before they go out to sea. It's a nursery, a massive nursery for a lot of aquatic life. I worked at an estuarine research reserve, and I had to like Google what estuary meant before I interviewed there, because I'm a forest ecologist. But you know, the forest goes right up to the water's edge. This is like part salty, part freshwater, which is how the salmon adapt to those two different environments, right? They're born in fresh, they adapt and grow their ability to live in saltwater in estuaries, and then they go out to sea. So estuaries, they're one of our most rapidly developing places because they're beautiful. They're on the coast, but they're super important to a lot of processes, right? Especially like salmon, which is important to us commercially and ecologically. And then there's a bunch of science going on out there. They're looking at sea level rise. You know, of course, that would be like one of the first places to observe it is on the coast near the sea. I usually just was having a bug bite competition with my colleagues because apparently I just like attracted all the bugs while they got to do the science. They're looking at eelgrass. I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff that scientists are doing out there. And I just think it's important to translate that to real world, like people making the decisions, the politicians, and those of us, each one of us making our decisions with our dollar or our behavior, kind of, you know, just realizing that as humans, we're trying to understand these processes better and then, you know, adapting as we learn more. And then there's the east side, the sagebrush sea, totally different, right? Like not a lot of evergreen trees. This is higher elevation, so they have more extreme summers, more extreme winters. Their vegetation has to be a lot more. Surprisingly, we have pretty drought tolerant vegetation. Evergreens exist because they are drought tolerant for a certain period of time. But on the east side, you know, they have some serious periods of no water, and the sagebrush can tolerate that. Their trees are more pines. They can handle more drought. Junipers, which they love and hate out there. They have different animals because of their climate. There's antelope out there. That's not what are they called? Pronghorn is their technical name. They have scorpions out there. They have sage grouse. There's hot springs. I mean, there's hot springs all over because we have volcanoes, right? But yeah, that's just a totally different look than the west side of the state, huh? More deserty. And then this is sort of just like, you know, there is absolutely nowhere you can go pretty much on our planet, but in the Northwest that humans haven't been before. And so sometimes I just like knowing the little signs of humans because it helps me realize that there's been people there before and there'll be people there again. And we do impact the landscapes that we touch. So if you're out walking around in the Northwest and you see apple trees, that's definitely a sign humans have lived there at one point. Because those aren't native, but like St. Cloud is a really cool area that we're doing some restoration work at, and it's an old apple orchard, and it's cool because you can see evidence of how the humans used the landscape before us. And then another thing to pay attention to if you're out walking in the woods is that center picture. Do you see the divot out of the base of that stump? It's like a decaying stump, and then there's like a little divot on the left of it. That's a sign of humans. Well, one, the flat stump is a sign of humans because that means it was cut down. It didn't fall down. If a tree falls, it doesn't fall with like a flat surface, right? But if you see that flat surface of a stump and then a little notch that's called a springboard notch, and that is evidence of pretty, well, ancient isn't right because it's only a couple decades ago, but logging, when sort of, it's an early form of logging. And in order to get up above where the grain of the tree was easier to cut, you know, because they didn't used to have big heavy equipment back then. It was just guys cutting it down with saws, and they didn't even have chainsaws back then. They would notch a hole into the stump. They would put a board in there, and you see old logging pictures like this. There's two guys standing on boards, and then they're pulling one of those saws across. So that notch is evidence that there was a springboard that a guy had to stand on to fall that tree. It was it's evidence of old logging, right? So I didn't know about those till I started working in forestry, but they're called springboard notches. And if you see them, it's like evidence of early logging days. There's always old equipment abandoned in the woods. I've been in really weird remote places where I didn't, expect to see evidence of humans, and there's evidence of us everywhere. I don't know why I put a picture of the Astoria Bridge, probably because, that is a major transportation system. That's the Columbia River meeting the Pacific Ocean. And we use that for shipping. That's massively important to shipping for us to be able to have what we need to live. And so it's a notoriously dangerous place. It's a notoriously constantly changing place. And as humans, we have to control it to a certain extent with like dredging a channel so we can continue to get the goods and services we need in our ports. So that's evidence of humans, right? Controlling the environment. And then sort of just wrapping up, invasive species are a thing. They're usually invasive because they can outcompete the natives, whether they photosynthesize year round or grow faster, or like for the blackberry, birds love it, so they spread it around. The Himalayan blackberry is invasive. It's the one that creates the big thickets that we all kind of hate. It's probably the most delicious invasive species because I like to eat it. But we also have at least 3 types of native blackberries. We have the trailing blackberry. We have several native berries. We have salmonberry, we have thimbleberry, we have blackcap raspberry. So there are wild berries that naturally grew here before we introduced these. These are the Himalayan blackberries, the Armenian blackberries. They just grow really fast, and we all have probably dealt with them at some point, whether we're enjoying their fruit or trying to whack them back out of our yard. But they're just doing the best they can, which is growing as fast as they can. Just us as humans and probably the landscapes before they existed there, we definitely have they affect our lives, right? So a lot of invasive species can choke out native species that affect the cycles that are happening on that landscape. There's invasive species in all forms. A lot of them come in ballast water in boats. So boats will pick up a bunch of water to maintain their balance. And then they'll come into port and they'll release that water as they unload. And there's everything that was in that water comes with it. There's rules about ballast water now, but humans, we like, a lot of us are immigrants, and so sometimes we did or do bring things from the lands we were from, and then that might not be something that is in balance with the system we moved to. So like English ivy and starlings, I think those were introduced to the US. I've heard they were introduced because there was someone that wanted to provide all of the species that Shakespeare talked about into Central Park. And so that was a European set of species that were brought to the US. And now, it's just a very prevalent thing, English ivy. Though that can actually grow up a tree, grow over the tree, and then the tree can no longer get light. So then it falls. So like highway departments have a big problem with that. You don't want trees falling on your highway. Yeah, and basically, like if we disturb an area, like logging is a big disturbance, right, to an area. If we're not, well, even if we are diligent about revisiting and trying to get the species we want back in there for timber production, a disturbance that removes all the vegetation of a landscape really just opens up the landscape to something that's like faster and better growing, or faster and better at growing. So like, we'll get Scotch broom that comes in, or gorse that comes into a logging site, and it, a lot of logging has to then apply herbicides because they're trying to get the trees to grow, not the invasive species. And so it's just a part of our lives. The invasive species aren't like thinking about it, they're just doing what they do best, which is growing. But it does affect, like, us financially or ecologically, for sure. Yeah. Oh, and then I just put these here because there's some cool, like, little other things to look for when you're out in our landscapes. There's these water bugs called caddisflies, and that picture on the left is a caddisfly. It's like its reproductive area. It creates like these it'll glue little rocks together, and then that's where its like larva goes. And so it looks like rocks magically stuck to a rock, and that's a caddisfly. I don't know if nest is the appropriate word. It's like a larval encasing for caddisflies. I mentioned stumps. A lot of, whether they fell naturally or by humans, there's a number of species around here that just really prefer and do well in that slowly decaying wood of a stump or a downed log. And one of them is evergreen or red huckleberry. And so you'll often see that center picture is like a giant, massive red huckleberry growing out of a decaying stump from an old time logging operation. And so when I make recommendations for native plants to put in your yard, sometimes like if you have shade and if you have a bunch of like old decaying, like you have a bunch of evergreen trees, like you might be able to grow this species in your yard. If you don't, if you have full sun and I would not recommend trying to put this species in your yard because it's definitely just going to burn up and die. But yeah, these nurse logs provide, it's sort of that like even in death, they're connected to life. Nurse logs are providing a water sink, a massive like source of water, a massive source of nutrients. And often they're like these, like this one's in a forest, so there's part shade. So this species, red huckleberry, can do really well. Western hemlocks also grow really well out of nurse logs or nurse stumps. So if you're ever in the woods and you see like a bunch of trees growing in a row, look on the ground and see if there is an old log that was maybe fell and was decaying. And then there's a good chance that all those trees growing out of it in that row are Western hemlocks. They just grow really well on that like decaying matter. Yeah, and they're called nurse, like think about it, they're nursing the next like life of the forest. And then I think I just have this thank you thing with all my information. If you want to learn more about Northwest ecology, you can come to the barn and we can talk about it. Or Naturescaping is another good place to go see it. But they're starting to put more and more native plants in their gardens. And they're like a cool place to go because well, one, you can get landscape ideas. Two, they have native and non-native stuff. And three, they have several different gardens. At Naturescaping in Southwest Washington, it's in Brush Prairie. So you can see kind of how you might, as a person with a landscape, you might be interested in augmenting, how you get ideas from there. And then I think they just had one garden, Backyard Habitat certified. And Backyard Habitat is a program we have just in our region that helps people make choices in their landscapes to improve the connectivity between everything I just talked about, all the natural processes occurring in the Pacific Northwest with our like human controlled yards, which might not typically be as connected to that landscape where our natural processes are happening. So Backyard Habitat's a program put on by the Watershed Alliance and Columbia Land Trust and one other partner to help people. Like you can look up their information and there's like wildlife activities you can do, plants and sort of like structure you can shoot for in your yard. They talk about invasive species and there's like 5 metrics and choices you can make in your human controlled landscape that benefit the landscape across the entire region. So yeah, so I definitely recommend looking at Backyard Habitat. I definitely recommend you coming to see me at my farm in Washougal. I definitely recommend you going out and exploring the Northwest because I've been to a lot of places on this planet and there is nowhere else I'd want to like spend most of my days than the Pacific Northwest. And you can tell a bunch of people are moving here and I can't really blame them because it is an incredible place to live. And we've got it all. We really do. We have mountains, we have beaches, we have deserts, we have high elevation, we have low elevation. And we got a ton of different things living and dead out there that are happening, whether we're paying attention or not. So, it's worth paying attention every once in a while. So I guess I didn't think I'd finish early, but we definitely have 20 minutes if you guys want to ask questions.
Yeah.
Just want to mention again, if people want to ask it, they can type it in the chat, and also that there's a number of thank yous that came through and said they really enjoyed the presentation.
Oh, good. Ending class early, that's always like a cool thing when you have to be there. Yeah, I guess I'll stick around, but if you guys are done, I'm done. So I don't know what, oh, this is the thank yous. Okay. I told you I didn't pay attention to the chats very well.
Yeah, if you wanted to see them to come in, but just click on that chat and
Oh,
yeah.
there it is. Oh, cottonwoods. There's one. Do they grow near water? Absolutely. Cottonwoods grow. They're a riparian species. They grow in my wetlands. I like cottonwoods. They grow quickly. They spray that cotton stuff all over in the summer. But yeah, if you see cottonwoods, there probably is a water source nearby. They do grow. Oh, but do they just grow near water? I don't know. I think they prefer it, but they probably can handle a little bit of distance. Yeah. I do really love to Google things. I'll probably Google black cottonwoods after this and be like, what's their, are all holly species invasive? Yes. There is there is a similar species that's native called Oregon grape. We have two types that grow around here, and that I think Oregon grape is a much more desirable species than holly. But holly do get bigger, and you can make those tree shapes, and they're like good for wreaths at Christmas. But yeah, holly is a non-native species, no matter what kind it is. And it will take over wherever you put it. So I am pretty confident in that answer. Cool. All right.
Okay.
Maybe I'll scroll back up and see. I wonder if there's any names. I have two of the girls that work for me on my farm said they were listening. We'll see. I'm going to quiz them on it this weekend. Actually, come to the farm and then we can all quiz them on it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Hopefully that person contacts me about their yard questions.
Oh, there comes a new one here. Says, how about some native plants that are edible?
Oh, okay. Well, here, I'm sharing my screen, right? So we did do this. This might be the fastest way to find them, but there's tons of them. And then actually the girl that's been helping me update this website, so you can go to goodyearfarms.com and you can go to products, and then we made a thing called edible. And so she actually has added them. So she didn't just put, these are like ethnobotanically edible, like camas bulbs, they're edible. They were like a main staple for Native Americans. They're starch source, but they're not edible. Like, then we have all their berries. So we have several huckleberries that are edible around here. We have those blackberries I told you about, salmonberry and thimbleberry, edible natives. We have several types of edible native strawberries. They're not going to be as large of berries as our horticultural varieties, but they exist, and they're a really good cover, like ground cover strawberries. Oregon grape is technically edible. That's what I was saying is a good alternative to holly. We have elderberries, which are they're good to like cook and eat. You can make elderberry syrup out of our native edibles. And then rose hips are technically edible. Emma's been adding like the leaves of the checker mallow are edible. Self-heal is like a native herbaceous plant that is hugely medicinal, and it's like a very neutral taste, so it's a good edible. We have currants that are edible. The nodding onion, oh, I sell this plant, and I just like, I don't think, me and my coworkers are just always so jazzed about it because it's a beautiful bloom. Like, I mean, you can see that's bloom here, but it's also edible. It's like a green onion. Like, look at its flower. And then it's got cool black seeds. Looks just like a green onion. Frogs like it. Yeah, nodding onion's a good one. And you can divide it. You can plant it, spread it out yourself. So that's like one fast way to look for edibles. Here we also organize like that backyard habitat program I was telling you about. They recommend plants on this Portland plant list. So if you're interested in participating in that program, you can click that link, and these are all on that. These are all fair game for you to plant in your yard to meet those requirements. Sun and shade is sometimes the best way to organize or start your selection. Yeah, flowers, And I'm going to open up the website for orders tomorrow, but I'll also be open. But you know what? This website, even if you don't buy anything from me, we've spent a lot of time just trying to get native plant information to be accessible. So like, we've included pictures, some guidance on where and how it grows, and tried to make it not boring. We tried to make it not boring. So, I wouldn't say it's like an encyclopedia reference, but it's an okay reference for native plants around here, especially if you're interested in planting them in your yard.
And it looks
Oh, and then, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just there's a few more questions, including a comment from Marlene that the Portland Audubon is the third partner in the backyard certificate.
Yes, Portland Audubon, sorry. Yeah, I knew there was a third.
Last question was, what are those plants that grow by creeks and water and look like cigarettes? Are they easy to grow?
I think what you're talking about is horsetail. Are they easy to grow? Is this what the person's talking about? Let's see.
The person who asked that question, you can feel free to confirm in the chat.
I don't know. This would be the only like cigarette looking plant. See how it, so this plant is super cool. It definitely grows by water. It's easy to grow, and like my husband used to have to pull this for his stepdad, and it's segmented. So it's a very ancient plant. It evolved in that period between like when plants were coming up out of the water, and like wood didn't exist in plants yet. This plant, it grows in segments, and it's rigid, and it's just like an ancient reproductive form, because it didn't have the lignin that is what like gives a lot of plants its rigidity. So when you try to pull it, it breaks at these intersections right here. It's super hard to pull, but it dies back, and then this is like what it looks like as it blooms. And I think it's really cool, but it's like growing in my garden crop right now, and if you're trying to garden, it's really annoying. But yeah, it's definitely a riparian species. It grows along water, grows in the woods, and it grows underground in like big mats. So it's all connected. So it's hard. I'd say yes, it grows easy in the right place, and it's hard to get rid of once it's growing. But I think it's cool, and it's ancient, so that's also cool.
Yeah, they did confirm that's the plant they were referring to.
Yeah, horsetail. Let's see. I don't know the genus and species, but I call it horsetail. Yeah.
And there was another question after that that says, do you have any thoughts or experience with, and I hope I'm saying this right, chinquapins?
Oh, let's see if I can. Maybe Monotropia. I don't know what that means. Oh, chinquapins. Skunk cabbage is also easy to grow in the right conditions. It likes swamps. Oh, I don't know what this is. Oak? I don't obviously have any experience with it. Yeah, no, but now I'm curious what it is. It looks like it's a type of tree, a shrub in the genus Castanopsis. Oh, it's a nut. I am not, oh, a chestnut. I am not, there are American chestnuts. They're not native to here. I'm not sure if there is a native chestnut. There might be, but I don't have a lot of experience with it. The American chestnut is susceptible to this blight that's killing it off like on a huge scale. So actually there's a couple like rogue American chestnuts that we have growing around different areas in the Northwest. And that blight has existed for longer on the east side of the state where there's more chestnuts. And so now it's kind of like, it's cool that we have them because they're being eliminated elsewhere. So.
There's a question about visiting your farm. Do you need an appointment to show up?
So I'm open on Saturdays and Sundays this month and probably next month. So if it's a Saturday or Sunday between 10 and 4, you do not need an appointment. If it's outside those hours, you should send me an email because there's a chance I'm not here. But yeah, no, come this weekend, come next weekend, Memorial Day. Yeah, golden chinquapins. Yeah, I've never heard of this one. Maybe I'll have to grow it. And oh yeah, Pacific. Oh, look at this. And I advertise on this site. Oh my gosh, cool. Thanks, crowd, for teaching me about this. Oh yeah, and then there's its native range. Looks like it looks like it's a little further south than us, which would explain the drought tolerance. So, but there, Columbia River Gorge, 2 small populations in Skamania County. That's cool. I'll have to look into that one more. Yeah.
Then we have
Cool.
a follow-up to horsetails. Are wondering if they were considered invasive here. And then another question about, is skunk cabbage easy to grow?
Yeah, so invasive is definitely just something humans came up with. Plants did not come up with that. We call things invasive because from our human perspective, they're doing something that we don't value. They're either outcompeting or replacing something we do value, or they are behaving in a way that we don't like because we're wanting to use that landscape for something else. So like I said, in my garden plot, horsetail are invasive. They're not invasive. I would call them aggressive. They're aggressive growers when they're in a place that they can grow. So one of the things that I am careful to recommend to people is if they want like a low maintenance plant, I don't recommend things that grow aggressively, because you think that's what you want because you want it to fill in quickly, but then you spend the next 10 years trying to keep it in control. So it's aggressive. It's not like by like the scientific wildlife, like ecologist definition, horsetail is not invasive, but it's certainly like if it's in a space you don't want it, it behaves invasively. And then skunk cabbage is not easy to grow outside of its conditions. If you have a swampy area that has a lot of standing or slow moving water that's like part shade, yeah, you can put skunk cabbage in there. But if you have an open wetland like me, it's not part shade, or if you have no water, yeah, you're not growing skunk cabbage. So easy is relative with under the right conditions. Yeah. And then it propagates. It's so beautiful. Skunk cabbage is so cool looking. And it's like Jurassic Park. It gets giant leaves. If you don't have those conditions, like the swampy, wet, part shade conditions, it's better to just go find it and enjoy it somewhere else. But I mean, anything's easy to grow if you have the right conditions and you know how to do it. But I'm certainly just still learning about cracking the code of different species, because they're all different, right? Like every person, they got different needs, and sometimes they like scare easy and they're like refuse to grow. So yeah.
Looks like no new questions, but some more thank yous and compliments.
Cool.
Yeah, we're almost at time.
All right.
So there's no questions, or Hannah, Marlene, any parting thoughts or final comments?
Nope.
Okay.
I guess just go to Naturescaping and come to Goodyear Farms and become a member of Naturescaping. It's cool. It's cool stuff happening around here. And Marlene, if you remember, Marlene sends out a newsletter with all this information on it, like what's happening. So
Thanks, Hannah. Great. I love the promo.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's good. Thank you again, Hannah, and thank you everyone for coming.
cool.
All right. All right.
All right.
We'll
See you guys around.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Hannah.
See ya.